Daisy had always been strong-willed, someone who liked to have the final say in an argument. In her mind, winning meant proving her point, making sure her words landed in a way that left no room for doubt. But in her determination to win, she never stopped to consider the cost. The night started like many others, tense and exhausting, filled with an unspoken irritation that had become an unshakable part of their marriage. It wasn't a single, earth-shattering problem that had led them here, but a steady accumulation of unresolved disagreements, sarcastic remarks disguised as jokes, and a growing distance neither of them dared to acknowledge out loud. Their love, once vibrant and full of warmth, had cooled into a simmering resentment that neither could quite put into words. Raymond, her husband, had always exuded confidence. He carried himself with an air of certainty, rarely showing vulnerability. Daisy had always assumed he was unshakable, that nothing ever truly got to him. She had never questioned whether there were hidden insecurities lurking beneath the surface. In all their years together, she had never suspected there was something he worked so hard to hide. But that night, she found it. And she didn't just find it. She struck it with all the force of her frustration. The argument had escalated quickly. Neither of them was listening, both too busy trying to be heard. It was one of those fights that wasn't really about solving anything, but about proving a point, about refusing to back down. Daisy wanted to win. She wanted him to feel the weight of her exhaustion, her exasperation, her disappointment. And so, without thinking, without even realizing the magnitude of what she was about to say, she let the words fly. "You argue a lot to be a man. No wonder you're so tiny down there." The moment the words left her mouth, the entire atmosphere in the room shifted. It was as if the air had been sucked out, leaving only a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. The anger disappeared from Raymond's face, but not in the way Daisy expected. He didn't fire back with an insult of his own. He didn't shout or slam his fist on the table like she thought he might. Instead, he just stopped. His face froze, his jaw clenched, and his hands curled into tight fists at his sides. But it wasn't just anger that flickered across his expression. It was something much worse. Pain, betrayal, humiliation. It was the kind of look that made Daisy's stomach drop, a look that told her she had just shattered something inside him, something fragile, something she wasn't even supposed to know existed. Then, without a word, Raymond turned and walked away. Daisy stood there, waiting for him to turn back and yell at her, to fight, to say something, anything. But he never did, and that silence was worse than any argument they had ever had. She went to bed expecting him to cool off, assuming that by morning, things would go back to normal. That's how it always was: fights, then silence, then eventually reconciliation. But when she woke up the next morning and reached for him, his side of the bed was still cold and empty. A sense of unease settled in her chest as she got up to find him. She searched the house, expecting to see him in the kitchen or on the couch, but instead, she found him in the guest room, sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. He wasn't angry. He wasn't frustrated. He wasn't even moving. He just sat there, as if something inside him had shut down completely. She hesitated in the doorway before speaking. "Raymond?" No response. "Why are you sleeping in here?" Still nothing. She tried again, asking if he was still mad, if he was going to come back to bed, but he barely even acknowledged her presence. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't to argue. It wasn't even to tell her how much she had hurt him. It was just silence, the kind that said everything without saying anything at all. Days passed and nothing changed. At first, Daisy convinced herself that he just needed time, that he would come around, that things would go back to how they were. But he didn't. He avoided her at every opportunity. If she walked into a room, he walked out. If she tried to talk to him, he gave her nothing. If she reached out to touch him, he pulled away. It wasn't anger. It wasn't resentment. It was something deeper. It was like she had been erased from his life without him ever needing to say the words. She tried to fix it the way she knew how. She made his favorite meals, hoping the smell of home-cooked food would soften him. He barely touched his plate. She tried to joke to lighten the mood, but he didn't laugh. She even tried to be affectionate, reaching for his hand, brushing against him when they passed each other, but he stiffened at her touch. Nothing worked, and for the first time in their marriage, Daisy realized this wasn't just another fight. She hadn't just hurt him. She had broken something, and she had no idea how to fix it. Lingered far beyond the moment they were spoken. She thought they were fleeting, meant to sting but never to scar. But what she said to Raymond that night did more than just bruise his ego or wound his pride. It ripped open an old gash, one that had never fully healed, one he had spent years pretending didn't exist. Raymond had always been self-conscious about his size. It was a secret battle he had fought alone, something he had never spoken about, not even to his closest friends. The weight of those insecurities had followed him from childhood, a constant shadow in the background. He remembered the laughter in the school hallways, the hushed whispers behind his back, the rumors that spread like wildfire. One particular memory burned the most, when a cruel, baseless rumor started in the locker room had reached the girl he had a crush on. He still remembered the way she had looked at him afterward, not with anger, not even with pity, just indifference, as if he had ceased to exist in her eyes. That moment had shaped him, leaving a scar that no one could see, but that he carried with him every day. As he grew older, he buried those insecurities, hiding them beneath layers of confidence he forced himself to wear. He convinced himself that he was stronger now, that he had moved past it. But then came another betrayal, his last serious relationship. He had walked in on her with someone else, and when he demanded to know why, she didn't apologize. She didn't beg. She didn't even lie. She simply shrugged and delivered the cruelest truth he had ever heard. "You can't satisfy me." Those words had destroyed him. They had confirmed his worst fears, the ones he had fought so hard to suppress. From that moment on, he vowed never to let anyone see that part of him again. He built himself up, carried himself with unshakable confidence, and convinced himself he was finally in control of his own worth. And then he met Daisy. She had been different. With her, he felt safe. He didn't have to prove anything, didn't have to worry about the ghosts of his past. She loved him, or so he thought, until that night, until she threw those words in his face like a dagger aimed straight at his deepest wound. "You argue a lot to be a man. No wonder you're so tiny down there." In an instant, he was back in that high school hallway, back in that room with his ex, back in every moment he had tried to forget. But this time, it was different. This time, the words didn't come from a stranger or a past lover. They came from the one person he trusted most, the one person he thought would never say something like that. And for the first time in their marriage, he wasn't sure if he could ever look at her the same way again. Worse, he wondered if she had already betrayed him like the others. Daisy, too, had reached a breaking point. She had spent weeks trying to fix what was broken between them, hoping things would return to normal. But instead, the distance between them grew wider. That night, she decided she couldn't wait anymore. She walked into the guest room, expecting to find him scrolling through his phone as he had been doing for weeks. But the bed was empty, the shower was running, and his phone was sitting on the bed, its screen still lit. She had never been the type to invade his privacy, but something inside her told her to look. Just a quick glance, nothing more. Her fingers hesitated, but then she saw it. An email notification flashing on the screen. Subject: regarding divorce proceedings. Her heart stopped. Divorce. The word itself felt unreal. She stared at the screen, her breath shallow, her mind racing. This wasn't just a fight. This wasn't about a single insult. This was something much, much bigger. Raymond wasn't just angry. He wasn't just punishing her with silence. He was preparing to leave her. Panic surged through her, hands trembling. She set the phone back down and stepped away from the bed, as if physical distance could change what she had just seen. When he emerged from the bathroom, She was already waiting. Are you really thinking about divorcing me over one argument? Her voice wavered. For the first time in weeks, he looked at her, but there was no anger, no sadness, just nothing. And that emptiness was far worse than any rage he could have shown. You think this is just about that night? His voice was eerily calm. And in that moment, Daisy realized this wasn't about a single fight. It was about everything. The unresolved arguments, the emotional distance, the wounds left to fester for too long. Her words that night weren't the cause of his decision. They were simply the final straw. She tried everything. She apologized, not just with words but with actions. She cooked his favorite meals, left little notes for him, tried to start conversations about anything, work, the weather, something light. But nothing worked. He responded with nods, shrugs, and empty words. She could feel it. He already knew whether or not he wanted to stay, and she was terrified that his silence was the answer. One evening, she walked past the guest room and froze. He was standing by the bed, a suitcase open in front of him, clothes neatly folded inside. Are you really leaving? Her voice was barely a whisper. Raymond sighed, gripping the edge of the suitcase like it was the only thing grounding him. Finally, he turned to her. I don't know if I can get past this. The words hit her harder than any shouting match ever could. This wasn't anger. This was honesty. And that was so much worse. Tears streamed down her face. She no longer cared about pride, about dignity. I love you, she pleaded. I messed up. If I could take it back, I would. Just tell me what to do. For the first time in weeks, something in his expression shifted. He studied her, weighing something she couldn't see. Then, finally, he spoke. You can't take back what you said, and I can't unhear it. But maybe I don't want to walk away. Not yet. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise. But it was something. And for now, that was all Daisy had left to hold on to. Raymond didn't leave that night, but the damage remained. The road to healing would be long, and some wounds wouldn't fade overnight. The real question was, could their love survive this? What do you think? Can a marriage survive something like this? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching. Until next time,